Welcome back to our corporate immigration series on Africa. I'm Andreas. I'm a Senior Director for Africa and Europe at IBM Immigration Solutions, and we are part of Envoy Global. I work in the last 20 years with lots of businesses moving people in and out of Africa, and I've seen quite a few projects going wrong due to lack of information, wrong planning, wrong timelines. So we hope that the following video enables you to do a little bit better planning, hopefully with our help. And I am today joined by my very dear colleague, Melissa. Over to you.
Thank you, Andreas. I'm Melissa Moses, a senior immigration consultant at IBN Immigration, a company of Envoy Global. And today my focus is on the technical detail. So which permits apply, how compliance is enforced, where the unexpected pitfalls are for companies. And together, I think we are going to do a breakdown for you in terms of immigration systems, how to plan ahead, and also how to stay compliant and be aware of all the unnecessary costs coming your way.
And we're doing that for the country of Egypt. Okay, so today Egypt is our topic. Very large market in North Africa. We see a lot of inquiries for Egypt. You can see that it's definitely, well, probably unofficially the largest economy in Africa, maybe the second largest, one never knows. Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, they constantly change, but I think Egypt is number one. But anyway, so let's move into that and go straight forward into Egypt. Melissa, what is happening there? What opportunities are there?
So I think in terms of opportunities in Egypt, it's very important to understand that typically what is on paper isn't always necessarily what is, happening practically. It is one of the African countries where what we understand in terms of the law and compliance isn't always followed through by the authorities. They are, however, always evolving. And I think it's important for us to always make sure that our clients are compliant and aware of both legal and also practical challenges in Egypt.
So let's start quite simple, right? So say I'm a company planning to enter the Egypt market or have won a project in Egypt, and I want to send a couple of employees there. So what routes are actually available?
Well, the Egypt immigration landscape is quite limited in terms of the routes that are available. They've got very straightforward work permits and then also residence permits. But I think the most important for any company or HR to know sending people into Egypt is that they follow the correct route and sequencing. So we are looking at, if you're sending a foreign expat to Egypt, they would need to obtain a work permit and a residence permit, and this allows them to legally work and reside in country.
And who drives the process, the employee or the employer?
So typically it would be the employer that drives the process because you have to have a legally registered entity in Egypt in order to sponsor someone coming to work for your company. Obviously, the employee would also need to provide certain documentation, but the majority of documents and sponsorship would come from the employer in Egypt.
And tell me, in Egypt, are there quotas or payroll caps in general? Or how does it work?
So Egypt is one of the African countries that makes use of a quota system. The quota system primarily focuses on the amount of foreign expats that are employed in the local entity. So the workforce or the foreign workforce cannot exceed 10% in terms of employing foreigners.
Of total numbers of
Correct.
Yeah.
And then with regards to payroll, there is also a quota actually. So the foreigner cannot, or the total workforce of foreign nationals cannot exceed 20% in terms of payroll in comparison to the local
So
labor.
they actually have an amount of employees as well as a payroll. So they do have some sort of thresholds for salaries as well, obviously.
That's correct.
Okay, cool, interesting. And tell me, so what's the sequencing? What's the order of immigration in Egypt, right? So we in Africa we usually always look at, South Africa is the one system, work permit is residence, there's no entry visa, etc., and then you have the other extreme, which usually has entry visas, work permissions, and then residence. Where does Egypt fall into? What's the sequence?
So Egypt definitely doesn't follow the same route like South Africa in terms of work and residence coinciding in one visa. It's actually a 3-step process. So first and foremost, the applicant would need to enter Egypt on a work visa or a business visa, but typically work visa because it needs to be converted at a later stage, right? Then, once in country, the applicant would need to first and foremost go and do an HIV test, which has to be done in Egypt. Only then can they apply for the work permit because the HIV test is a mandatory requirement in terms of lodging the application for the work permit. Once the work permit has then been processed, which is typically within the validity of the visa, the applicant can then proceed to apply for the residence permit.
Okay.
And once the residence and work permit has been issued, they are then considered fully legally compliant in Egypt to work and reside.
Okay. How long are they usually issued for? Did you say that?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
So typically the work permits are issued for a year at a time, and they can obviously be renewed for like periods.
Okay. And the residence, is it issued already longer, or is it also issued for a year?
So it's issued in line with the work permit.
Okay. Because some other African countries, obviously, they issue a residence suddenly for longer, and
Yes,
you just
correct.
have to renew the work. But okay, in Egypt,
Yeah.
it's Payroll. Okay. So let's talk very quickly about ESG. Where does that show up in Egypt, in the Egyptian immigration system?
So I think that in terms of ESG, it shows up in immigration in terms of the HIV test. If we compare this now to public health in Egypt, I think also priority in terms of quotas is given. So the consideration that the local labor market is shielded or taken care of. And then I think for governance, we are looking at the fact that employers or sponsoring entities need to be legally compliant and ensure that foreign nationals coming to Egypt are on the correct work permits.
Okay. Any red flags you want to tell our audience of?
So, like in other African countries, there are a few red flags for Egypt. I would say first and foremost that documentation needs to be provided in Arabic. And that can be quite time consuming because would need to be either legally translated by a sworn translator, or the foreign entity would need to ask the local company to have all those documentations translated. I think a red flag is also the HIV test. If an applicant is in Egypt and leaves before the work permit is issued, you would have to redo the HIV test. Processing times in Egypt can also become somewhat of a red flag, but we've noticed recently that they are processing the work permits a little bit quicker than before, but you'd need to plan roughly around a 4 to 6 week, sometimes even up to 8 weeks for processing of the
Where
work
do they
permit.
fall in terms of costs? So government fees, etc. Expensive, not expensive, cheap?
So I think it's moderate in
Okay.
Egypt if we compare it to other African countries.
Like a little bit like the other northern African countries,
Correct.
right? It's not like
Yeah.
East Africa, which is
It's not
incredible.
exorbitant.
Okay, yeah, okay. But in general, obviously, the service delivery is quite expensive in Egypt because the system is quite complex in a sense, right?
Correct.
Okay, cool. Then maybe just. I mean, you answered them already, but I would like to still maybe summarize it. What are your top 3 tips for corporates which want to enter the Egyptian market? What are the top 3 tips?
So I would say the top 3 tips is to consider the quotas before hiring a foreign national. Be aware of the red flags. And then I think the last one would be to, you need to ensure full compliance, and you need to be very aware of the fact that, coming into a country like Egypt, there will be delays in certain aspects, and that you need to be compliant in terms of following the correct routes so you don't have issues later on with the authorities.
And obviously, what I always say in every video, approach your immigration provider early enough, and not last minute. That always helps with with the quality and the achieving. So yeah, thanks very much for that. I think that's it on Egypt. I hope you found this useful.